Friends, in this module, we will look at how one should draw up a research protocol.
By now, we are generally familiar with what research is, what a research question is, and how we have to progress to get information to answer the research question in a scientific manner. To achieve these goals, we need to have a very clear document that specifies how we are going to reach that project. So when we start writing a protocol, we need to be very clear in our minds as to what a protocol is. Basically, it's a plan of action of a research project. It is laid out in great detail with nothing left for imagination and with no ambiguity. The aim of a protocol is to raise a research question. We have to have the background reading and get the information that we have about it so far. Based on that and based on the lack of available data, we formulate a hypothesis to try and get data to prove or disprove this hypothesis. And the hope is at the end of this exercise that you will be able to fill a gap in the existing data on a given subject. Now, to get the data and to really get a proper answer for the research question, we have to have a methodology. And once you define what that methodology is, the methodology may be, say, getting an ultrasound, doing a laparoscopy, getting an MRI or a CT, do some blood tests or whatever. Once you have the methodology, you define the requirements and the limitations of the study. Maybe you can't get all the information that you need, and so you will need to weigh the pros and cons, including the costs of the project, and then understand that there are some limitations, but once you meet the basic requirements, you have a project on hand. And always some time must be spent on the ethical issues involved, and we'll be talking a little bit more about it as we go along. A protocol basically is needed for clarity of the thought. If it's a single investigator, if I'm doing a study, for example, I need to know exactly what I'm doing step by step, and I should be able to finish the study without having any gaps in the data collection. Now, if there are multiple investigators involved, in addition to this clarity of thought, it also specifies to everybody exactly what is required. So without having to goad each other and keep questioning each other, all they have to do is look at the protocol and then follow it, and you know that everybody is on the same page. And of course, when you have a research project, it has to have an ethical committee approval. And unless you have a nice, detailed, convincing protocol, the ethical committee approval will not be forthcoming. And maybe the last step doesn't involve most of our studies because we do not usually ask for any outside funding. But if you are going for funding, the approval or otherwise for the funding depends on the veracity or the soundness of your protocol. The format of a protocol is as follows. It will have a title, it will have a summary. Summary is short but must make sense by itself because most people don't go through a detailed protocol. They read the summary with great concentration, and so your summary must be really very good. It will have a project description along with the rationale, the objectives, the methodology, and the data management. It will have ethical considerations. Perhaps we don't have to worry too much about gender issues in this country, but out in the West, yes, they have a lot of specific statements on gender issues, and of course the references that you have so far for basing your project on. The title must be concise. It cannot run into 5-6 lines, but at the same time it must be descriptive. It must convey the sense of a study. We had a project where we were comparing the post-op analgesia of epidural analgesia versus wound catheter analgesia. We wanted to know how it was. So we had to describe it. It was an RCT, a randomized controlled trial. And so we used a very simple two-line description for it. We said this is a randomized controlled trial comparing the effectiveness of epidural analgesia versus wound catheter irrigation analgesia in abdominal operations. No, it is descriptive and it conveys a sense of the study. So you need to think a little bit and see what you have to put into the title. The summary describes the project. It covers all aspects that we listed in the previous slide, and it must make sense all by itself. As I told you, many people who read it, particularly the outsiders like funding agencies, if any, or even the ethical committee, will look at the summary and it must make sense to them. Unless it makes sense to them, they will not approve it. And so you have to spend some time on describing the project nicely but concisely, perhaps within one page or 3/4 of a page to get a summary going. But remember, the summary is written after you completely write the project. Even though it figures very next to the title, the summary is written last, only after all the project details have been worked out and put in writing. Now the project itself, the rationale basically is an introduction. You basically convey what is known about it, what is the hiatus or a gap in knowledge, and so you're trying to fill that gap in knowledge with a research question. The research question will, most of the time, sometimes it may be just one question or one aspect, but most of the time it will have several angles to the answers that you get. And so what you have to do is define what is the primary outcome, what is it that you're primarily interested in, and then you may have 2 or 3 other secondary issues and they become secondary outcomes. Administrative responsibilities have to be written down because you must define who does what. What is your own role? What is your chief doing? What is a hospital administrator doing? Are you recruiting any colleagues for help? Fellow PGs, for example, they may be taking some, giving you some help through data collection. So those things have to be written down. And the methodology is something which is really what makes or breaks a paper. So you must define what are the characteristics of the subjects that you're doing. You must get a statistician's help and define the sample size. You have to design the study. Is it prospective, retrospective, randomized, blinded, not blinded? You must specify the interventions, what are the tests that you are doing, what are the kind of interviews, interval of follow-up, and the whole lot. Outcome measurements and endpoints which actually give you the answers for your primary and secondary outcomes. That has to be clear. And the frequency of observation, whatever tests you're doing, how often are you doing? What is your total follow-up? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, whatever. So the whole thing has to be defined in your project description. Going on, once you define how you collect the data, you must know how to manage it. Data points being collected, how is it managed? Are you doing it in a computer database? Is it written big spreadsheet, or is it a computer spreadsheet? What are the statistics being applied? Is there a software that you're using it? Those things have to be specified. And as I said, nowadays ethical considerations are taking an important role in your protocol description. You must specify that you're going to maintain the confidentiality of the patient. Data can never be divulged without the patient's permission. Many times you will not reveal the patient's identity. Completeness of reporting, you're not going to have any exclusions. You're going to stick to the intention to treat principle. You actually write the whole informed consent along with a preamble and define what are the things that you're going to describe to the patient and get a written consent from him. And of course, once you do all this, you apply it to the ethical committee approval and get a clearance from them. Many times, many institutions, including my own, we have a scientific committee as well. So we put up protocols first through the scientific committee, These are outside our department and they go through the scientific veracity. And if they have any comments, we satisfy them, make sure that it is scientifically valid, and then put it on to the ethical committee for their approval. Budgetary considerations is something that I've written, but most of the studies that we do uh, costs next to nothing, either to the patient or to the institution. But if there are some issues involved where cost is involved, it has to be specified. I have put a separate slide on informed consent because this is something which is many times not done at all. Patients who are participating in a study don't even know that they are participating, and that is clearly unacceptable. Your informed consent must, in layman's terms, remember, it must be in layman's terms, it must give the aims and objectives, interventions being planned, side effects of those interventions, if any, and these have to be explained to the patient. Not, you don't just give a consent form and ask him to sign it. You sit with him for maybe 10-15 minutes, explain it to him in his own language, in the way he can understand. Talk to him about randomization, costs involved, if any, and how many times he has to come to the hospital, because we will have a protocol based revisit for outcome measurement. But the last two things are very important. You have to specifically say that there is no obligation for him to take part. If he doesn't want to participate, you will not put direct or indirect pressure on him to participate. And second, even if he agrees to participate and halfway through the study he finds the going tough or he has some reservations about it, you have to give him the option to opt out, to go out of the study without assigning any reasons. This may look very funny to you. You may also think that nobody will participate if this is done. But please believe me, we've been doing it for the last 15 years, 17 years, and people will participate. The number of people who refuse to participate or who opt out in the middle of the study is really very small. So this in brief is what you have to do when we drop a protocol. We'll now actually have a hands-on writing a protocol. We'll have an imaginary study and all of us will go through these steps in finding out how we can draw up a whole protocol. Thank you.